Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. Today's video is about the psychology behind terrorism. So what drives terrorist agendas? What kind of individuals are recruited to terrorist movements? What conditions grow a terrorist? And my area of expertise, the big question, can you consider terrorists to be mentally ill? Finally, what is the cure for terrorism? I will answer all of these questions and many, many more in this episode of A Psych for Sore Minds. So grab your favorite rambling 500-page manifesto. I educate whilst you celebrate. I educate whilst you vegetate. As usual, let's start with the story. I'm going to tell you about Alexanda Kotey. So he was known in the press as one of the Jihadi Beatles. First of all, a bit about his background. He was born on the 3rd of December 1983, which means he's got the same birthday as Ozzy Osbourne, the bat-eating, hell-raising mumbler, Anna Freud, the Austrian-English psychoanalyst and daughter of my homeboy, the godfather of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, not to be mistaken for Colonel Sanders, and the very tall R&B singer, Montel Jordan. This is how we do it, it's Friday night, and I'm feeling... This year, that's 2021, Kotey pleaded guilty to hostage taking resulting in death and promoting materials supporting Islamic State, and he also took part in atrocities in the Syrian civil war. He was designated a terrorist by the United States, and he was labelled in the media as one of the 4 Jihadi Beatles, which seems a bit harsh on the Beatles, who, as far as I'm aware, have no right-wing views. Maybe they should have been called the Jihadi Take That, as they have been implicated in acts of terror against my earbuds. So Kotey's father was from Ghana and his mother was from Cyprus, and he spent his youth in Shepherd's Bush, and apparently he worked as a drug dealer before his radicalisation. He converted to Islam in his early 20s, and he had 2 children who left in Britain. According to the United States, Kotey was involved in beheadings and exceptionally cruel methods of torture, including electric shocks. Some of the beheadings were even filmed and broadcast on social media. And Kotey also worked as an ISIS recruiter and admitted that he joined Daesh. Guantanamo Bay was actually considered, as was the death penalty for him in the United States. But instead, he pleaded guilty to a number of charges in the States, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. So he's on a minimum sentence of life without parole, according to the deal that he's agreed to, although after 15 years, he'll be transferred to the UK to face his crimes in this country. So dear viewers, what are your thoughts about the death penalty? I've asked you that in previous videos, but I've got the feeling that you're going to be less sympathetic in this case. Let me know your thoughts, please, in the comments sections below. Okay, so next question. What do American neo-Nazis, white supremacists, jihadis, Islamists, and anti-immigration European skinheads all have in common? Well, firstly, they're terrible dinner guests. They keep banging on about raging war, and they never bring a bottle of wine, and they always leave the toilet seat up. But more importantly, despite their polar opposite belief systems, their psychological makeup is actually starkly similar. So the vast majority are young men, and I'm mainly going to be talking about men in this video, and they often feel displaced. So they're kind of outcasts who don't fit into society. So economically, they feel emasculated, they feel wronged, but more than that, they feel entitled. So it's not just wronged in life, but in a larger kind of economic and political sense. Often they're isolated, and often they're bullied in school. So it's never really the cool jock or the guy who always threw house parties when his parents were away skiing, who was really popular in school. It was never that guy that gets radicalized. Just like me in high school when I was captain of the chess team with my buck teeth and my 90s curtain haircut. As you can imagine, I was fighting off the women. But these extremists, they have their masculinity kind of taken away, either directly or by things they've witnessed, or sometimes by these unseen conspiracies that they focus on. And the base emotional drive behind this all is a sense of shame. And they fight this with violence, and they try and replace it with pride. And these people feel that they need to represent and need to be represented by something bigger than they are. Now, of course, you might be thinking that a lot of people feel like they've failed as men or as adults, or that they're not progressing in life, but the majority of these people turn inwards, or they turn towards people close to them. So their psychological reaction is like depression or domestic violence or self-harm or self-medication through drugs and alcohol. In extreme cases, they even make lame attempts to become YouTube personalities. But a small proportion of extremists and terrorists turn towards this kind of righteous political rage. And it helps their own internalized perception of themselves. So if they stop seeing themselves as failures, and then they can start seeing themselves as victims. And as I kind of alluded to, often they have been victims in earlier life. Usually there's a background of some kind of trauma, either being badly beaten by their fathers, or being abandoned, or being really badly bullied. Unfortunately, I can't relate to being bullied because as captain of the chess team in high school with my teeth and my 90s haircut, my haircut was so trendy it would actually burn your eyes just to look at it. So as you can imagine, the school bullies just couldn't help but respect me. But the problem with these extremists is if they're a victim, then they need a tormentor. And this can be anything from immigrants taking their jobs, to greedy corporations or bankers taking their money, or to Western civilization as a whole forcing them to have fun. Often the root of all this hatred is money, of course. Not only individuals experiencing poverty, but economic displacement of a whole ignored underclass of society who they feel they represent, or even an entire country when they feel the rest of the globe is succeeding. So when these men feel alienated, they have this sense of camaraderie and community with their new environment, and they have to kind of keep up this toxic masculinity because it gives them a feeling of meaning and of purpose. So we've talked about the individual traits, but what about in a broader sense? What conditions make a terrorist? Let's boil it down like an overcooked egg. Firstly, they seem to think there is a political problem, and the solution of that is violence. And the problem might be immigrants, it might be that they're involuntary celibates, such as the incel movement. So see my video on Jake Davison, he was the Plymouth mass shooter. Or they might perceive Western corruption of the West having free values. They might see that as a problem. Next, their violence is justified because in their mind, their cause is so important. And also on top of that, they have some sort of support within their community. Usually this is the physical community around them, such as impoverished areas in the north of England that breed right-wing Nazis, or at least some of the local community in Afghanistan or Iraq who support what they see as freedom fighters. However, I think terrorism is upgrading in that I think there's this new online communities. So incel movement that I've just talked about would be an exact example of this. In my view, the incel movement should be classed as terrorism, as it's a bunch of young men, spotty virgins, who try and scare the public in general to their political beliefs, and they try and promote their beliefs. Do you agree with me, viewers? Let me know in the comments below. There have been a few really high profile mass killings where the perpetrators have identified with the incel ideology. The most famous one, I mentioned him before, the Plymouth shooter Jake Davison. But there's also Alec Manassian. I've done videos on both of those people with my psychoanalysis. Go check them out. On top of everything I've said, in non-conflict zones, it's about discrimination, marginalization, and a desire for adventure and even sex. And in conflict zones, it's often about trauma of people that they've witnessed their family members being killed, and they want revenge. They want to stand up for people, and they see the people who've been killed, their relatives, as being martyrs. And in terms of recruitment, these terrorist organizations, they project this kind of utopia. So that could be an all-white race, or it could be like 72 virgins. If a Muslim extremist dies in jihad, 72 virgins wait for them in heaven. I've not seen that many virgins since I was captain of the chess club. So, big question. Can you consider terrorists to be mentally ill? Before I answer that question, I want to introduce you to this channel. My name is Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in courts and in prisons and in psychiatric units. This channel, A Psych for Sore Minds, covers a whole range of topics, some related to mental illness, like specific diagnoses. Sometimes I answer people's questions from the internet. Sometimes I talk about high-profile cases. Sometimes I talk about the theories of criminality, like in this episode. What I'm trying to say is there's something for everybody on this channel. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it gets rid of that nasty toenail fungus that we both know you've been suffering from. Guaranteed all your money back. So can you consider terrorists to be mentally ill? It's complicated, but if I was going to summarize it, I would say simply no. First, let's examine how the public sometimes view mental illness. Having very extreme ideas and intentions and not having the social and the ethical restraints and barriers to stop acts of violence isn't mental illness, contrary to popular beliefs. I mean, there's something wrong with that person and therefore they must be mentally ill is understandable, but it's not technically correct. I've frequently been told that somebody with extreme ideas such as serial killers or people who, sexually offend children by definition must be mentally ill. But that's not correct if we look at the psychiatrist's view of mentally ill, or if that somebody's a dangerous offender, a forensic psychiatrist view like myself. Our view tends to be that it has to fit with a diagnosable mental illness with specific symptoms. So just having hate and anger isn't a specific symptom of a mental illness. To give you a very simple example, schizophrenia is a mental illness and it has definable symptoms: hallucinations, paranoid delusions. I've done a video on schizophrenia, check that out if you want to know more. Or psychotic depression might have nihilistic delusions. So is the ideology behind terrorism very extreme and unusual? Absolutely. But is it delusional? No, because it's in keeping with that particular culture and background. So if you're brought up with, or if you associate with an underclass, a subsection of society that promotes that particular belief or way of life, extreme racism or religious intolerance, then it's not a delusion, despite how unpalatable it might be. This is because it would come from an ununderstandable place. So to kind of contrast that, delusions that I've seen include people believing that they're being spied upon, or that their food is being poisoned, or they have the ability to fly or to read minds, or I've seen a prisoner who's convinced that other prisoners were committing black magic on him and were shrinking his genitals. In fact, I talk about that in my book. I've got a book called 𝐸2�minds, which will be released by Sphere Publishing in spring 2022. Go check it out. So what I'm saying is, no matter how unacceptable extremist right-wing views might be, they're not driven by mental illness. The perpetrators aren't psychotic. They're not out of touch of reality. In fact, arguably, it's even unfair to call it mental illness, because they might have a psychiatric defense. It might reduce their culpability during a court case. And I think we'd all agree that all terrorists need to be punished. Having said all of that, dear viewers, I've seen at least one case in my career of terrorism which was driven by mental illness, where somebody had false delusional beliefs about being targeted by the Citizens Advice Bureau, and he sent them death threats. And he was actually thinking of making a homemade bomb. And this man got as far as getting all the ingredients together, but thankfully the police intercepted him before he had a chance to make it. So as I said, I'm going to talk about that case in a lot more detail in my book 𝐸2�minds, released next spring. Go chickadee, check it out. So finally, there's the legal definition of insane, and perhaps in this context it's the most important definition, because this decides the future of the individual terrorist. So let's look at the psychiatric defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. I've mentioned this before in other videos. To boil it down, it's basically about the person having a defect of reason caused by a disease of the mind, which prevents the perpetrator from either understanding the nature of their act or not knowing that it was legally wrong. And legally is key in this case, because all terrorists must know what they're doing, because it's a very kind of calculated and organized effort, to either plant a bomb or to obtain guns or to go on a killing spree. So for example, in the case of Alec Manassian, who I mentioned before, who I've done a video on, he intentionally hired a van with the purpose of running over and killing people. He killed 10 people in Toronto and injured 16 others in 2018. But the point I'm trying to make, it's about whether they know what they're doing is wrong. And most terrorists would think what they're doing in their own warped kind of mind is ethically reasonable, but they would know it's against the law. Just in the same way that you might want to slap a charity mugger in the face, but you knew it would be against the law, even if you had your own justifications. Therefore, the vast majority of terrorists would not be classified as legally insane. Why am I telling you all this? Why is that distinction important? The reason is because potentially if they got this insanity plea, not guilty by reason of insanity, they wouldn't go to prison. They would instead go to hospital for rehabilitation. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to de-radicalize some terrorists, but I do think it's extremely hard because their belief systems are intrinsic and they're so entrenched. Well, they must be for somebody to even commit this level of violence, so it's really hard to get rid of that. I think it's not unreasonable to try to do that in prison, only to reduce further risks of further atrocities in the future, but I don't think they should take up a hospital bed in a secure psychiatric unit, because these are expensive and they're limited, and in my view they should only be used for people with severe mental illness who need to be rehabilitated. The the kind of people who don't have criminal culpability. Done loads of cases on them on this channel. Andrea Yates, somebody who became psychotic, killed her own 5 children in 2001, and my most extreme case of Yasmin. Go check out those videos on this channel. Okay, so next question, what is the cure for terrorism? Well, in my humble opinion, I say humble, but I am awesome. One strategy in terms of prevention of terrorism is teaching young children in vulnerable areas exactly how those organizations work and what they promise versus what is reality. So I think they should show them terrorists being severely injured, having their limbs blown off, or being arrested and spending years in prison. And I think using former rehabilitated terrorists and extremists, which do exist, is a good way of showing this reality. Just like an ex-gang member might speak to school children, and they will often be seen by these children as more credible than somebody like myself or a policeman giving them a lecture. I think the key in dealing with individuals who are on the cusp of being radicalized, or even who have been radicalized but have not yet committed atrocities, is offering them another way where they can prove their masculinity, like contact sports, boxing, or chess club. So it makes them feel like they're really men, and it makes them feel like their lives matter. Terrorist lives matter. I'm not sure that's going to take off as a particularly popular movement. Let's face it, bit of a PR nightmare. So what about you, dear viewers? What do you think is the cure for terrorism? I know a lot of you would be keen to punish terrorists severely, and some of you would probably support the death penalty. The problem is that makes them more of a martyr, and they're seen by other vulnerable youth in their community as a hero fighting against the system, which means that there's more risk of more people being recruited. Anyway, in conclusion, there are many factors, both individual and societal, that contribute to isolation, resentment, entitlement, and eventually terrorism. The answers are not easy. And in my view, it's not just about the stick, there also needs to be carrot. And mental illness is not an explanation. And I think there's a danger that it could be used as an excuse. That's enough from me. Spread the love. Please tell everybody else that you ever meet about my channel. Stay euthymic, and please do not forget, I love you.